the health effects of loneliness were the equivalent of smoking 17 cigarettes a day. It leads to lower brain growth among children. It leads to earlier deaths. We as humans are meant to live together, are meant to help each other out, and that's the way the species evolved. We lived in tribes, we lived in villages, and we've lost sight of that, and we've lost the habit of what it is like to live an interconnected life. So with Supernuclear, we really want to inspire and enable people to live this type of life again.
Welcome to the Agartha podcast, where we discuss all things Solarpunk about ethical technology, planetary regeneration, loving communities, and spiritual growth.
Gillian, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being a part of this inaugural launch of what we're doing here. And perhaps maybe the best way that we can start is, could you please introduce yourself and tell us a bit of your story?
Cool. Yes. So my name is Gillian Morris, and I write the blog Supernuclear with my friend Phil. And Supernuclear is all about going beyond the nuclear family. So the idea is incorporating your extended family, your friends into your daily life, and in a way that is pretty much the way most of humanity has lived. But in the 20th and 21st century in the US especially, we've really moved away from this, and we live these very atomized lives. So Supernuclear is talking about how do we live well together again, and how can we reclaim that community that we used to have historically.
And how long have you been working on this project? What's the journey been like?
We started the blog in 2020. It was definitely a COVID, oh my God, project. But it was something that we had both been interested in doing for a long time before. Both Phil and I have been living in community for more than 10 years, maybe even more than 15 years. In my case, I lived with a group of friends in Istanbul, and then in New York City, and then in the Bay Area, and now Puerto Rico. And Phil and his wife, Kristen, started a co-living house in the Bay Area and now co-bought property with a bunch of friends. And both of us have been on this journey, and a lot of people would say, oh, I wish I had a living situation like that. And we decided to write up a guide so more people could figure out how to do that.
And what would you describe is the mission behind it? What is the impact that you're hoping to achieve with this?
I mean, I believe very strongly that we as humans are meant to live together, are meant to help each other out. And that's the way the species evolved. We lived in tribes, we lived in villages, and we've lost sight of that. And we've lost the habit of what it is like to live an interconnected life. So with Supernuclear, we really want to inspire and enable people to live this type of life again. So inspiration is important because I think a lot of people see the benefit in this, but they also think that there are going to be way too many downsides, so they're not that interested in it. They say, oh, well, we'll have conflict, it'll be dirty, there are all these things that could go wrong. And so we want to show people the things that can go right too, and why it might be worth taking the risk and making the effort. And then enabling is just as important. So giving people the tools so we share, templates for how to lease to your friends, or how to structure LLCs, how to present yourself to a bank to get a loan when you're co-buying, which is an unusual thing for anyone more than an individual or a couple to do. So, and so on. So Inspire and enable people to live with their friends.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, I love this. Well, it does make me think about how backwards society can feel sometimes, because the way that civilization set up now feels quite unnatural for the way we've lived for thousands and thousands of years as a species in these larger, more village-oriented communities. And I do think that there's something tied to that separation that's leading to chronic loneliness and impacting our mental health, social cohesion, and even our biological health is impacted by that.
Yes.
Are you noticing similar things, or what's that?
I mean, absolutely. This is, and we read these news articles, but I think not a lot of people realized quite how serious it was until the pandemic. So Vivek Murthy, who is the Surgeon General of the US, at one point issued this study saying that the health effects of loneliness were the equivalent of smoking 17 cigarettes a day. And it's very well documented. It leads to lower brain growth among children. It leads to earlier deaths from anxiety and depression and greater cardiac incidence. I could cite all of these statistics, but I think a lot of people would read that and they'd say, okay, but that doesn't really apply to me. And then the pandemic struck. And so many people were faced with really, really crippling loneliness. And it hit home to a lot more people. And, I've been living this way for more than a decade. And so I was used to this, and I've been beating the drum for a long time, but it was hard to convince people. And since COVID, there's just been this deluge of interest. There's tailwinds. I'm using the wrong metaphors,
Right.
but so many people are realizing that maybe the way that we've been living isn't healthy and isn't working for us.
Yeah, I see that. Well, I'm also curious too, by launching this and having people reach out, what are the things that you're now learning? Are you seeing certain patterns emerge with this new wave or this new trend that's taking place?
I love with Supernuclear, we have an intake survey when you subscribe, and a tiny percentage of our readers have filled it out, but it's still, we have a couple hundred, maybe more than 1,000 responses. And some of the things that have stuck out to me are, I think it's pretty obvious to a lot of people that this would be so amazing with families. It would be so amazing to have help with childcare.
Right.
It would be so amazing for different communities. What surprised me are the number of people who say, I chose not to have kids, or I ended up not having kids, but I really do want to be involved in the next generation. And so I'd love to live around them, and I'd love to be in a community that has the next generation, even though I'm quite happy to not have my own, or something. This is what some people say.
Right.
And so I think that has been a nice realization. People realize that there is something to community that is, connection to a whole. I remember this one person had this very memorable, I don't know if it's a he or she, so I'll just say they said, the hedonic treadmill of just going to the next party or buying myself the next thing just isn't working for me.
Right.
I want to be part of something. I want to build and raise the next generation.
Yeah, there's that deep human connection that we're kind of missing.
Yes.
And it does make me think about, because I have two young daughters, and in a traditional family system that I grew up in, I was in a multi-generational home. So I was living in the same house as my grandparents and my uncles and cousins, and it felt much more intermingled. And when I realize now, I actually really long for my father to be able to live with me and to experience my children growing up. And there's something about that dynamic where the elderly benefit so much from the energy of youth. It actually like recharges them. It reminds them of what it means to have wonder and awe and to grow. And I think there's something very healing to that. And then the children benefit so much from the wisdom of age and life experience and perspective. And we kind of create a society that totally cuts that out from each other. It's like so disconnected.
It's wild. And it's funny because as you're saying this, I'm thinking, this is so obvious, right? And I think most people listening will think the same thing. And yet it's so obvious, and yet we're not doing it.
Yeah.
And Phil, my co-author of Supernuclear, has this great post. He talks about the obvious truth that we are our best when we are surrounded and intertwined with the people that we love, and that we can help each other out in hard times. There's another phrase someone said, they're like, we invest in community in the good times. No, we invest in community to make the hard times better and to make the good times incredible.
Oh, I love that. That's
Yeah.
great. Well, why do you think that is? What do you think was the shift where this like separation came into play?
Yeah, so I think we've become able to afford this through a bunch of different forces. So I wrote about this a little bit in an op-ed that I just wrote in the Times, but in the early 20th century in the US, you had this combination of forces. So the streetcar and the automobile enabled people to live further out so they could get cheaper land. So and then there was also at the same time a standardization of building supplies. So it became a lot cheaper to build because the land was cheaper and the materials were cheaper. And so people were given the option, and in many cases they chose to take it. And I think this is a common theme that we see, people choosing something they think is going to be more optimal.
Right.
But not realizing all of the knock-on effects.
Yeah.
So there is this great study out of the University of Chicago. They took people on a subway commute and they said, okay, what would make you happier? Keeping to yourself or talking to a stranger? And pretty much everyone was like, I'll keep to myself, please. I don't want to talk to a stranger. Stranger danger,
Yeah.
yeah. So then they set an experiment and they said, okay, this group, you have to go and talk to a stranger. This group, you have to keep to yourself. And this group is the control group, so do whatever happens normally. And then they measured it. They interviewed people afterwards about their energy levels, about their emotions, about their outlook on life. And pretty much universally, the people that had talked to a stranger were more, and who were expecting to find that like a not great experience, had more energy, had a more positive outlook on life, were just generally feeling happier. The people who had kept to themselves, which was what they wanted to do, were overwhelmingly sadder and more tired. And so we are energized by being with people, whether we realize it or not, and by connecting with other humans. So anyway, coming back to the housing side of things, I think people were given this option where they're like, well, I can have a house and it's really affordable, so I'll do that. There was also a massive marketing campaign from the government and the real estate industry. So the real estate industry got the government to invest in lobbying, in this massive campaign where they would go out to universities and talk about how amazing it was to own your own home, how it was really the pillar of being a good citizen. And a motivation for this was anti-communist. The government was worried about Red Scare, and they thought if people own their home, they'll be less likely to be radicalized. And it was also kind of anti-feminist. So there was this phenomenon after World War I, especially, where women had entered the workforce during the war. And then all of a sudden, all these men were coming home, they needed jobs, and the wartime economy boom was going away. And there are records of meetings in the Commerce Department, and they said, well, what's a way that we can get women out of the workforce and also make sure there are more jobs? If everyone has their own home, women will be busy because it takes a tremendous amount of time to keep a home, to cook and clean for just your nuclear family. Also, listen to that term, nuclear. The nuclear family was basically this concept that the nuclear family was the desirable right way to live, came about in the nuclear age in the 20s and the 30s. And so, yes, there was this, thinking that women would be at home, they would be busy, and also they would buy more stuff. So every household would need its own car, would need its own dishwasher, and this would be a tremendous boost to the economy. And it was.
Yeah.
It really worked.
Right.
It really worked for the economy.
Yeah. It's like
it really worked for a bunch of, I'm not trying to sound like a total anti-capitalist here, but it really worked for a bunch of big corporations, real estate, and
number grow up,
and
right?
banks lending and all this. But I don't think it really worked for the people. Yeah. I think family structures have fallen apart. I think our social cohesion has fallen apart. We have this polarization. We have so much loneliness, and now we can't afford it anymore.
Right.
So the vast majority of my peers, and definitely anyone younger, will never be able to afford their own home at current earning rates.
Right.
So, but also, why are we so set on owning our own home when it's such a drain of our resources?
Yeah. Wow, that was excellent, Julian, because there's so many pieces there to unpack or dive into. And yeah, so one point, I do think our measurements for success probably need a bit of an upgrade, because essentially we're looking at one metric, which is how much economic growth are we perceiving. And then in doing so, we're forgetting things like happiness and health and unity in so many different ways. So I think it is quite destructive. And to recap what you're describing, there's these economic forces and efficiencies that have created this more nuclear family-oriented structure. There are some narratives as well. And then there's even sometimes these subtle agendas around putting forth a prescriptive way of living. So all these things have kind of been pushing us further and further away into this, a little bit of a dystopia in some regards.
I think it's very dystopian.
Yeah,
I think the way we live today.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so coming back to a lot of the work that you're doing, what kind of progress have you seen in this space? And are you noticing other folks like you doing similar things? Like, what does that look like?
Yes. So I think what is so exciting to me is this has gone from a fringe radical thing that most people definitely judged me for, to something that more and more people are cautiously interested in. So I think we've just seen, we have a lot of subscribers to our blog, and we also have a lot of media interests. So we get reach out all the time. And I was lucky enough to just publish an op-ed in the New York Times, but almost every major publication has written about this now. There are a lot of trend pieces. And I do think it's hard to measure absolute numbers because the census data is not super granular according to, there has been a huge boost of people living in more adults living together, but a lot of that has also been adult children moving back in with their parents, which is definitely in our book considered supernuclear living, like anything that is more than just, parents and school-age children. So multi-generational homes, I think, are amazing.
Right.
And so we are seeing a big uptick in people living together again. But, it's soon to tell. It's at this point, it feels like almost more of a feeling.
Yeah.
But I've noticed a huge difference between the way that I talked about this and people always saying like, okay, that's really weird that you do that. Glad that works for you, to that's really weird you do that. And like, can you tell me more?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a big shift. And, it's why I love the work that you're doing, because in order for someone to even start to adopt this, they have to first understand it's actually possible. Because I think there is this inherent bias against this for a number of different reasons. So I think demonstrating some success cases are important to just spark that little bit of curiosity. And then what I realized is that convincing someone to go over the edge, I think, requires them to kind of experience it in some way. They've got to be able to be in there and like feel what it's actually like to have dinner provided for you, and you don't have to do everything yourself, and maybe a friend can take care of your baby for just a night so you can sleep in. Those small little nudges bring so much safety and comfort into your life. And I think once you get a taste of it, it's hard to go back. It's like really, really difficult.
It is. Yeah, I do. I really love that about our community here in Puerto Rico. I've seen as a kind of gateway drug to a lot of people. I think in general, a lot of times people come and stay with us because they're looking for a beach getaway break. And they're just coming for a short period of time. And we have people, so our community here in Puerto Rico is a mix of short and long-term folks. There's some people who live here year-round, and there are usually some rooms that are open for people to come in for shorter periods. And usually we also have we have some 1-bedroom apartments where you have your own kitchen and it's self-contained. And we also have a 3-bedroom and a 7-bedroom. And usually people come in and they're like, I'd like a private 1-bedroom apartment, please. I like the idea of being near community, but also having my own space. And it's funny how quickly people are like, actually, are there any rooms in the 7-bedroom open? Because they realize how wonderful it is to share a kitchen.
Yeah.
I think so much of the hesitation people have comes from the fact that the only time they lived with other people other than their family growing up might have been early college or maybe their early 20s. And they lived with some random person they found on Craigslist who was creepy and weird and or drank all of their milk or something like this. And so they don't realize that people grow up. And also, if you're an adult who has, maybe doesn't stress out so much if the milk runs out, you can buy your own carton of milk and this type of thing. You actually get so many benefits, and you don't get tragedy of the commons, you get abundance of the commons.
Yeah, I love that. Well, actually, maybe it's a good opportunity to talk about some of the specifics of how this can be implemented or set up. And what you're doing here in Puerto Rico with Casa Chironja is really an amazing space. And I also know that there are other forums through which they can take place. Could you help us get a better picture more concretely how this could play out?
So there are so many communities around the world, and I would say most of them are pretty different. So, and also I talk about non-commercial co-living. So there is also this whole, increasingly there are a bunch of VC-backed companies who sort of have co-living. But to me, those are usually just kind of hostels or something. They're basically hospitality businesses, where they're selling a little bit more community. And I'm not trying to rag on them. I think they are a great option, also a great entree. But where I see the real power in this model is in community oriented co-living. So is groups of people organizing themselves and buying or renting a property together. And if they're then saving some money and or, they're able to invest that in the community themselves, rather than the money savings going to an investor who's taking it away. So the non-commercial co-living spaces around the world, I wish there was a really good directory of this. There is a website called IC.org, Intentional Communities, the Foundation for Intentional Community, which is a really great resource, but it skews pretty heavily towards rural, more sort of what I think a lot of people conceive of as the traditional commune.
Right.
And I don't know too many urban communities that are on there. I also think for a lot of reasons, a lot of thriving communities don't have any public presence because why should they?
Yeah,
You
you
know,
need to market it when you already have your family there, right?
they have a good community, they have all the people they need, and so it's kind of like why would a family make their website for
Yeah.
you know? So that being said, there are a few. We have a post on Supernuclear that we call the Directory of Community Directories,
Yes.
which lists a few and a few other resources. The Bay Area is, I would say, the one exception where there's a really, really great, easy to find resource. It's called Hate Street Commons, and they publish a housing roundup where all the houses submit their open rooms in a given month. And it just comes out once a month, so you can check that. And they also have other resources, Solidarity Fund and community mediation and all sorts of other things that have been
Amazing.
really impactful.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I think what we can do is we could probably have some links in the description of the post. So if anyone's listening and interested, we can provide some resources. And obviously, the directory is up on Supernuclear, so
Yes,
that's it's excellent. I'd also like to talk about now that you're living in these situations. It also can be challenging and difficult sometimes because people are very complex and they have their own needs, their own boundaries, and things may be unspoken. I'm curious if you could tell us a bit more about the friction that you've encountered and how to best navigate those situations.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is usually people's first question. They're like, what do you do with conflict? And conflict is inevitable. It's part of being human. It's part of every relationship. You know, people break up and get divorced as well. And that also happens in communal houses in terms of sometimes people just have differing standards or values, but that's okay. You know, in a lot of cases, you know, the simplest one, and frankly, often a really infuriating one, is someone who thinks that the thermostat should be set at 68 and someone who thinks that the thermostat should be set at 80 degrees. And this is a really fundamental difference. And it might not be navigable, you know, depending on how much it affects each person's comfort. You know, it might be that you need to go and find other people who want to set the thermostat at 68 degrees and live with them. But it's not saying that one is better than the other, you know?
Totally.
Like, it is simply a matter of personal preference. So anyway, conflicts happen. It's not a bad thing. It is a thing that is, but I think, you know, communication is really important, and most conflicts are navigable, but I think it's also important that people can and do exit if they need to. And I think there are so many people in the world, and you can probably find a community of people who want the same things that you do.
Yeah.
And I also think sometimes we see, you know, certain projects, certain communities last for a period of time and then they change and people say, oh, well, it shut down, so it wasn't a success. And I'm like, no, this was a great success for a period of time or for a phase of life. But that doesn't mean that it was meant to be forever. And that's okay. This is salient right now because Radish is the compound that my co-author Phil lives in. And they have been around for 8 years. It started as 7 friends. They bought 2 buildings and it's expanded. And now there are 20 adults, 8 children, and 6 buildings in this compound. And it's an incredible place for people who are thinking about having kids, starting to have kids, maybe up to 5 years old, but it's not in a good school district. And it's for a variety of and all of the units most of the units are 1 bedroom. So it sort of works for couple and baby, but doesn't really work for couple and 5-year-old and 2-year-old and maybe even having another one. So, and so the people that started Radish are selling, and it's actually splitting into 3 different communities. But when people say, oh, they're selling Radish, something must be wrong. It's like, no, nothing's wrong. It's been such an incredible place for a period of time. But it's time for a new generation of people who are in the, you know, like 5 years before baby to baby of 5 year or child of 5 years old, like that window. It's time for those folks to come in.
Totally. Yeah, it's like children outgrowing their clothes. It's not a bad thing
Exactly.
that you grow out of your
Yes.
clothes.
Yeah, and ideally you have friends that you can pass it along to.
Yeah, hand-me-downs. No, yeah, I totally get that, and it can be perceived from the outside as if, oh, this whole concept doesn't work because it can't last forever. But I think it's not recognizing that everything has changed, and then there's a saying, "The only constant in the universe is
Of
change."
course.
So I think it's a matter of what you end up taking away from that. And what I can imagine that scenario is that people that now have lived in there are moving on to their other communities and families, and that way of living now reverberates all over. So there's
Mhm.
something very beautiful about these containers having a finite lifespan, because then the people that are inside of it get to permeate and cross pollinate and spread. So
Mhm.
yeah, I really love that. It's
Yeah.
super cool.
I love there's a collective in New York called Fractal. And as a math nerd, I really love the concept of fractalization. It's new communities spawning. I am sometimes, people sometimes ask me, oh, will you run my co-living community? Oh, would you like to buy more property? And I have no desire to run a community. I want to live with my friends and I want us to all bear different responsibilities that kind of balance each other out. And I don't want to be some sort of landlord at the pyramid, at the top of a pyramid of different places. I want to live with my friends in a node that is connected to a bunch of other nodes in this decentralized world of communal spaces where people are crafting the thing that works for them. I actually, Casa Chironja here in Puerto Rico, I bought with some friends, and one of them is an incredible, incredible athlete. And it turns out that there's another building that is a community of ultra extreme athletes. And she ended up moving in there. And I'm sad that we don't live together anymore. And it's funny that she's an owner of the property and she doesn't live there. But at the same time, it makes so much more sense for her to be in this community that's 5 minutes walk away that is ultra extreme sports enthusiasts where they have like all the convenient gear that they can swap.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's a beautiful thing to have many communities that can all
Yeah.
interact and exchange. And sometimes they send people over to us as well.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, there's so many things there. Like one, I really respect that positioning where it feels more like a service to the broader collective than owning an idea or a concept. And I think sometimes really good ideas can sometimes get co-opted when a strong leader, such as yourself, uh, I think operates a bit more out of the ego and it kind of loses its direction. So just want to acknowledge, like, and I also want to say this too, just witnessing you lead this community is amazing. You've got such a great energy and this matriarchal power that's just quite clear and action oriented, yet gentle and loving. So yeah, it's too much.
That's so nice of you to say. But again,
Yeah.
I hesitate to use the term leader. I feel like, first of all, it would never be possible without everyone inputting their own special ingredients. And so maybe I'm an instigator, or maybe I am the backstop who makes sure that I catch things. But for the most part, I really am so lucky, and I always dream of this, that communities run themselves. And I think we are lucky enough to have that dynamic here.
Yeah, I love that. And actually, maybe if I could bring it back a little bit to the discussion on conflict, it's interesting because recently we worked on our team constitution and we're addressing our core values and our operating principles. And one of them was we treat conflict as an invitation to grow. And I think there's something really powerful when you can recognize that conflict's not there to tell you, okay, this is not meant to work. Sometimes it could be,
Yeah.
but I think when you take the moment to really inspect what's actually going on here, what you realize is that people have different needs, different perspectives, and actually you can learn
100%.
so much from that. And then if you then realize how much you can contribute back into that and help them, it changes everything in a dynamic. And it's like it can be very healing and very expensive. I think what happens often in families, but even if you just break it down to relationships, it's when we're afraid to look at conflict and realize that there's something worth fixing, and we tend to give up very quickly, or we don't express ourselves correctly and it turns into its own form of violence in some ways.
Yeah.
I think there's something important about how communities can thrive by having the courage to step in and lean into conflict. And, I think that there's something about the way communities can thrive is a lot related to emotional maturity and the ability to be transparent and to be communicative of things like that. So it almost seems as if there's like some kind of training element in community building that is more about the soft skills and a negotiation with each other. And so I'm curious because I don't know if that's the recipe for everybody, but are you seeing successful communities nail it in some kind of governance structure or practice or ethos, or is it loose? Yeah, what do you see?
I think there are a few principles that, first of all, I agree with everything that you said. That's very insightful. And I think there are a few things that we've seen work for a lot of communities. I will say every community is a little different and some are more hierarchical. I was actually really surprised. I was in a discussion with Timothy Phillips, who started Lightning Society in New York, which is this arts collective or a co-living collective in Bushwick that's been around for, I think, 12 years now. But he said, yeah, I'm a benevolent dictator. The buck stops with me. And in some ways that makes it easier for people. If someone needs to be kicked out, I do it. And that means that this person doesn't feel like they've been rejected by their entire community. They just feel like they've been rejected by me. And that means that he has to absorb their resentment, but at the same time, it's a kindness towards everyone else to take that. So that works for some people.
Yeah.
There are definitely groups of people who would not be okay with that at all. And so what I'm saying is there are a diversity of governance structures that work. But one thing that I have seen be very productive across different structures is this concept of do-ocracy. So the idea of do-ocracy is essentially, if you want to do something, do it. Small qualifications. It is good to advise people that you are going to do it, because sometimes people will say, there's a very good reason we don't do that. Say, I'm going to, build a slide from the second story to the first story. And someone can say, oh, we would lose our building permit if we did that, something along those lines. But so advise people what you're going to do. And if no one strenuously objects, just do it. And you have the right to do these things. You have the right as someone who lives here to alter the environment in a way that you think is going to be better for people. And the other thing is also, ideally, only things that are reversible. So don't decide to sell all of the furniture or something without more buy-in.
Right.
But the principle of do-ocracy, why this is important, is because places can fall apart with inaction.
Yep.
And I think having to wait for consensus from absolutely everyone, people have lives, people get busy. And so I find, stasis and lack of things happening is one of the ways that communities die.
Yeah, I see.
And so there's something very important about not only allowing people to instigate their own change and take ownership and agency over the space, but inspiring them that is something that they can do, and it will be in service of the community.
I see. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, it's a little bit of it's easier to ask for forgiveness and ask for permission in some regards, knowing that there's at least some boundaries or some safety mechanisms in place.
Yeah.
Because I think if you end up putting too much red tape, any friction point would disincentivize people from actually getting shit done.
Yeah.
So I can see that. All right. Well, I'm also curious, what are some spectacular failures that you witnessed or observed, or maybe even been through?
Do we need to focus on the failures?
Perhaps not.
No, I think there are, to me, like I said, it's not a failure necessarily if a community shuts down, because maybe it had its time. I think where communities can fail is they can fail individual people. So in any community, and I want to emphasize that this is not co-living specific, but this is going to happen in a workplace, or this is going to happen. Sometimes someone gets hurt, whether that is emotionally or someone steals from someone else or something like this. And it's not always, sometimes what is best for the community is not great for one person. And that's tough.
Right.
But that is also, again, that is part of society.
Yep.
And if you have someone who is consistently doing antisocial things that are damaging the community, it might make sense to ask them to leave.
Right.
And that might be really hard for that person. And I I do think we as a community have invested a lot in the idea, in the communities that I'm part of, in the idea of restorative justice, not necessarily reporting something to the police and making someone go to jail, but working out ways that we as a community can mediate and can, um, work in our own sort of community-oriented justice system.
Yeah, I see.
I feel like this is a very complex topic
It
to get
is.
into,
Yeah.
but I think the most important thing is that you can actually have a situation where rehabilitation is possible and is reached through just, the power of the community.
Yeah. That is a deep topic. And maybe the only thing I'll say there is that there is a sense that I have that love and compassion ultimately in the long run is really the answer. And systematically, we don't default to that. It's like kind of the last thing that's ever thought of in terms of rehabilitation. So I do hope that the way we approach that brings on a lot more love and compassion. That's like what I'm
Well,
going to say.
I think in our default society, it is very easy to act in your individual best interests.
Right.
And if you have invested in property with a community, you might be tied into other people's best interests in a way that can be difficult. But it also means that you're much more invested in figuring out a way to resolve conflict.
Yeah.
And that is, as you have pointed out, such an opportunity for growth.
Yes, completely. And yeah, and I mainly asked that question as a way to identify learning, because and maybe from my personal experience running organizations and teams, what I tended to find was actually most of the problems were never really economic or technological. It was actually all people and social oriented. Really dug down into it. So I've seen teams that have essentially lost their way because the dynamics turned into more politics and power games, or there is these misperceptions and people couldn't communicate, and therefore it led to resentment, and that built up over time because they could never resolve it. And then ultimately the team or even the business would ever fall apart. I mean, I've had my own businesses fall apart just because I wasn't able to solve the people management or the people dynamics element behind it. So I can imagine in a place where you're living together how accentuated those situations can be. So in some ways, I think community living and co-living can increase its benefits, but also requires like some level of mastery in emotions and communications to some degree. Yeah.
I think you develop it
Yeah.
with
Yeah,
practice, but I don't think that you have to be a master to make it work.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, again, they emphasize they get hesitant because they worry about the complexity and they worry about the things that will go wrong.
Good point.
And I just have experienced so many more cases of things going like incandescently right in just better than anyone expected. And I'm not trying to, make people naive or paper over or gloss over the bad things that can happen. But I also think that we hold community living to an unreasonable standard
Right.
where
Totally.
people don't acknowledge that, again, in every human relationship,
Yeah,
you
I
can
see.
have opportunities for abuse, for failure, for hurt.
Yeah.
And, we're not absent that, but I also think there's so much more opportunity for support as well, and for the community to moderate extremes. This is a tough subject, but it comes up a lot. We see it in our comments. We'll get people say, oh, well, clearly this is just for pedophiles because people will abuse the children in this community. And I'm like, why is that where your head goes? Like, why do you think it's more likely, if I live in a community of dense, interconnected families, I think it would be a lot harder for someone to abuse a child or a partner than it is when you're in an atomized single family home.
Yep.
So I think it's this strange thing that, because it just, again, it comes up in the comments or people say this, and I'm sure it has happened in some communities, but I'm definitely sure it happens a lot more in nuclear families.
Right. Yeah.
This is probably a really insensitive metaphor, but people are so afraid of flying in a plane, and you're like 100 times more likely to die in a car crash.
Yeah, totally.
And so, yeah, people think that there are going to be so many wrong things about being in community. And I actually think you're a lot safer than you are in a smaller.
Yeah, I agree with that hypothesis for sure. Well, Jillian, tell me a bit more about the projects that you're working on because you've got Supernuclear, which is fantastic. It's such an extra resource and really picking up a lot of steam. You've recently written an article in the New York Times. You're running Casa Girona here. You've got some other things in the pipeline. Can you tell us a bit about what's ahead for you?
So I am working on a book. Supernuclear has enough of a readership that publishers have reached out, and that feels very exciting to just, reach a different medium. I also spent some time yesterday working with a friend here on maybe producing some reels and trying to expand into people who don't like to read, which is an increasingly large part of the population.
Yeah.
And so I'm really looking forward to figuring out new ways to communicate this message. I have a background in tech development, so I used to make an app called Hitlist that alerted you when flight prices dropped, and we helped millions of people find cheap flights and travel more, which was I'm very proud of the work that we did there. Unfortunately, the company more or less folded in the pandemic when people were not flying. It was not a great time to be buying flights. But I think a lot about whether there are tech tools that we could build in this space to help connect people interested in this way of life and make it easier to manage collective finances or decision making, things like this. I think there have been some really interesting experiments out there, and I'm so excited to see what you guys develop at Agartha.
Yeah.
It's been so interesting talking to you and your team. And so I would love to see what comes out of that and maybe build something myself someday or collaborate with other people. So
Love
there's
that.
there's a lot
Amazing.
to explore there.
Yeah, so happy to help you on your mission here. And yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities to collaborate here. There is such an opportunity in this space because there is such a need. And I think it's quite difficult to navigate this space because there's so much to learn and a lot of the information is very fragmented. So yeah, that's going to be quite interesting. Excellent.
Yeah.
So tell me about what your next 5 to 10 years looks like, and do you have any specific goals or
Yes. Oh, do I?
Yeah.
So, on a personal level, I really want to start a family. So that I hope that in 5 years I'll have at least a kid or two.
All right.
And I hope to be living in community. But like I said, I don't need a grand thing. I really feel like all of this exploration and all of these different places I've lived are really in the ultimate pursuit of finding the maybe 2 to 3 families that I will raise my kids alongside. And hopefully we'll be in a cluster or neighborhood where there will be other families and other groups nearby. But I think there's something really powerful about having an ultra small group of people that you collaborate with very deeply. And so I hope to be further along on that train. I deeply, deeply love the island of Puerto Rico, which has been my home for a while. And I also, my entire biological family and my history, I was born in New York City. The great thing is they're 3.5 hours away from each other.
Yeah.
So I look forward to making a life between these two places that I care about so much. And I also am really inspired and excited to see this movement expand and to see more. And I hope to see hundreds of thousands of new communities spring up around the world and communities that we can exchange between and travel between. And I've always dreamed, I have a group of friends, I got a tattoo with some of them where we talk about we are geographically tied to different places, but being close enough that we can just send our kids off to live with each other from time to time. And, I have a month break from having kids, but then next month I'll have Jeremy's kids and I'll teach them about, oceanography in the Caribbean Sea.
Yeah,
And then, but, when they're living with you, they're learning about, Solarpunk OS and all of the things that you're developing.
Wow, I love this. I have really thought about what could the future look like for education for my kids. And because I am living a bit more of this life that's exploring other parts of the world, I can see how valuable that would be for them. But the challenge is that they're kind of landlocked to the current school system. And the current school system doesn't have as much flexibility for a lifestyle that's going to learn different ways of living around the world and different cultures and different systems. So I do think a future could be much more communal education where it's multi-generational, that people are learning hands-on the kind of skills that they need to learn. And it's a little bit like this old apprenticeship and master way of learning, that kind of model. So yeah, that even brings up a topic around, could these spaces be great education centers for children too? And I'm curious, like, your take on that.
Well, first of all, there's a company that I've seen from the very beginning that I think it's called Boundless, and I really like their model. So they choose a location and bring a bunch of families together, and every family has their own apartment, but they have a central a co-working space and daycare and school. And I think, but it's targeted, I believe, at kids sort of 5 to 12, maybe
Right,
that
right.
time scale. And I went to the same public school system, K through 12, and I actually had an amazing time, especially at my high school, which had 2,600 students. But that meant that we had so many resources and an amazing swim team and an amazing theater program and all of these things that come with scale. So there is something to be said there. And I think this maybe being ultra atomized might be something that works better when you're a little younger. And then maybe there's a model where it is, maybe it's massive boarding schools or something like this. Who knows? I'm very excited to see what comes of education in the future. And another project, though, that I want to call out is Fractal University. So this group I mentioned in New York, the Fractal Co-Living Network, at a certain point, they started doing a school as well. And it's oriented at adults.
Okay.
But I think this model could very much pass to the next generation.
Yeah.
And so it's peer-to-peer learning and people offer courses. But it started with someone saying they wanted to take a MOOC, the online course.
It has to be online.
Yeah. And they wanted to take specifically Harvard CS50, which is like a canonical computer science class. And they said, the thing with all these online classes, yes, it's free online, but no one makes it all the way through. And they said, I think I'll be more likely to make it through if I throw it on the projector in this common space and other people join me. And then someone in the network said, I took that class at Harvard and I can be your teaching assistant. So I will be there and I can answer your questions as you work your way through this class. And it was a small group. And so they watched this course, they did it together. And then someone said, actually, well, I can teach a course on creative writing, or I can teach a course on Indian cooking, improvisational Indian cooking, or I can teach a course on classical music history. I can teach a course on the politics of New York City and how to get laws passed. That was a class that I took. It was incredible, taught by this guy, Daniel Gollier. And so it's this peer-to-peer university, but they have a centralized structure. They have a semester. They say like, okay, and these courses are going to be on Mondays from 6 to 8 p.m. for 8 weeks or something. And you sign up for a course, you often pay tuition, and then wherever is hosting the course, it's all in person. And wherever is hosting the course usually gets a venue fee of about 20% of the tuition. And now they have hundreds of students taking courses in Fractal University in this totally spontaneous peer-to-peer educational system.
Amazing.
That's been an incredible driver of community as well.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what I'm realizing as well. It's like, now when you have these community spaces, all of these other opportunities end up arising. So whether it's taking care of your kids or educating or cooking meals or cleaning, there's actually so much value being exchanged in these environments. And actually, it's something that our society doesn't even really recognize well. It doesn't really track that well. So it's almost like this totally separate economy that's taking place where real value is being created. And it's like totally disjointed economic system that measures things totally arbitrarily in some ways. And I often think about this too, where to me, the most valuable role on the planet is being a parent. Like, taking care of kids is such an important, precious thing. And if you mess that up, it creates this whole trajectory of a very destructive life for not just that child, but all the people around them. And our economy values that at zero. We actually have to pay a lot to become a parent in this society. And it feels like it's just so warped and upside down in many ways. So I am very curious to see, as these communities start to come together, whether there's new ways that we can recognize this value that's being generated here. I think there's a massive opportunity in that world.
Oh, I love that. Can you talk about that a little more? I'm sorry, I was just curious.
Well, in part, I do think that we have the ability now through technology to actually create new currencies. So blockchain technology, cryptocurrencies, although right now the current narrative or the bias can be, it's like a place for scammers and it's just like a bunch of people trying to take advantage of making money go up really fast and then dumping it and like taking the money out and screwing over a lot of people. That's a little bit of the bias around that. But fundamentally, what we now have the ability to do is we can create a trustworthy currency where you can exchange value together and actually measure that. So I do believe that because we have a little bit of this old system and an old narrative around that, we will pay certain roles very, very high salaries and other roles very little. But a small community can choose their own value system. And let's just say there's 20 of us co-living together. Great. I just babysitted your kids for 3 hours. That's something. Let's measure that. And we can mint a coin or mint a token that represents that contribution. Similarly, someone could have cleaned the house and fixed the plumbing in one area. Another person might have grown and harvested carrots and lettuce to bring into the family. Another person might be teaching a course and teaching the kids. So I think we have a way technologically to start measuring that and understanding that there is an exchange that we can now facilitate between each other that even ties to the reputation you have as well. Because all of a sudden now I have a digital representation of 1,000 hours of teaching. So I do think there's opportunity for new economies to kind of spring forth from there. And, and I think how that gets valued, whether or not it needs to be bridged to the legacy fiat system, or I don't think it even matters anymore, because now you can take that currency and perhaps bring it to another community and realize, okay, this community kind of shares similar values to us. We all recognize that taking care of children is good. I will happily exchange this for your service. I think that's the basis of what I'm seeing as a potential pattern. And if we crack the nut of creating an open protocol where that's possible, this is $1 trillion opportunity, because it just does not exist today, like a measurement of that. And not to say that that's where it has to go, but I think that's where the potential is. So I'm curious, does that make any sense to you?
No, I mean, it's funny because Cory Doctorow is a sci-fi writer, and he has a book called Walk Away that I think is incredible. My brother, who's somewhere around here at the moment, gave it to me for Christmas a couple years back. And there is this concept of, social credit and a leaderboard that comes up and is explored a little bit. I love sci-fi. I love actually the term speculative fiction, because that's what it is, right? It's exploring ways our future could develop. And I think they have an interesting narrative around why the leaderboard doesn't work very well.
Yes.
And I also think I hear echoes of China's social credit system,
Right.
which I have a lot of reservations about. And so it is tricky, I think, to imagine valuing a lot of this stuff in currency, whether it's
Right.
US dollars or community coin or
Right.
what have you.
Yep.
That being said, I mean, I don't want to be a default hater. I think there is an interesting experiment to be run, but I wonder whether people, completing a task for the sake of getting community coin is cheapening the experience of the actual human connection. And so I think it's something that maybe there's a specific use case that it makes sense for. There was with the Embassy Network, which is a network of a lot of communal spaces, community-run community spaces around the world. And they had early on an open source software called Modern Nomad, and they had this concept of drift. Drift was the idea that if you made your room available to someone and they rented it, you would get drift, and then you could use that drift to pay for a room in a different place. So this was a very specific use case. And I thought that was a great idea. Where it broke down was, someone was offering a room at their rural place in Costa Rica, and someone was offering a room at their place in New York City, in Manhattan, where their rent is $3,000 and the place in Costa Rica is, $3 or something. And so there wasn't an accounting system that worked out. I do think that's a use case, though, that makes sense to me. And I think that's also navigable by saying, okay, this place is worth 300 community coin, or this place is worth 10 community coin or something. I believe Traditional Dream Factory in Portugal is developing something along these lines.
Yes.
And I'm very intrigued to see how that works. But I do think there is something about being able to measure reputation and demonstrated, just reputation. We have systems already for reference checks. And those, I think, could be systematized somewhat. And I think that's a little bit of what you're getting at.
Yeah, I think
But it
so.
has to be done so
I
sensitively.
agree. I totally agree. Yeah, and I do think that these small containers are the perfect experimentation opportunities where we can try to have these hypotheses and test them out. And actually, I agree with you. There is a very clear danger of when you start to attach a dollar or money value towards something, does it warp the intrinsic value that actually drives people to do the thing? And I was talking to a friend who was really studying the economics around this. And the insight he shared with me was these things are happening naturally. And actually, it's not an economic exchange, it's actually an exchange of reputation, as he said. So if I do a thing for you, I'm not expecting money in return. I'm actually expecting trust to be built between us.
Yes.
And then if you were to give me money back for the thing I did, it's almost like an insult where it's like, no, 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 I actually want to cultivate a relationship. It's not a transaction.
Yeah.
And then because by you giving me that money, it's like releasing you of your connection to me in some ways. So I think it is such a sensitive gray area. And then the way humans operate is that we just keep inventory of that in our mind. We just know, okay, these people need these things from me. And there's some kind of social credit in some ways that's been built up that I kind of emotionally register in the body. And I just kind of remember that. So if there's a way that we can help surface and express that thing that we're doing right there, and allow that to be a medium through which we can build trust and then exchange things with each other. I don't know if it's necessarily a money figure, but it's something. It's something a little bit tangible.
Yeah.
And I come from the gaming world. So in many ways, the way this is expressed in gaming is actually through identity. So people will have their avatars, they'll deck it out with like costumes, they'll have like funny hats and funny masks. And they will literally spend hundreds of dollars to deck out. My daughters are like spending all this money on Roblox, decking out their avatar as an expression of who they are and their identity and their reputation. So perhaps in some ways that on the digital side, if we're mapping it to like really beautiful value that's being created on planet Earth for other human beings and to restore the Earth, and now it's an expression of who you are in its digital space, that's the world I'm like hoping we can move towards in some ways.
And that sounds like a great world.
Thank you. Well, I have a few more closing questions for you. One, is there anything people can do to help you with your mission and your journey?
I think please subscribe to Supernuclear. That's the main thing right now. And subscribe to Agartha while you're at it as well. And
On Substack.
yes,
Okay.
we are on Substack for now. We may or may not be on Substack forever.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I mean, this is just a personal, I'm sort of anti-platform. I like,
maybe.
owning your data. And so find Supernuclear wherever it is today when you are listening to this. And I always just come back to this idea. If these ideas resonate with you, talk about them. Talk about them with your friends. Have a dinner. Maybe do a study group or something where you say, we're going to talk about this article. It doesn't have to be one I've written. There are so many people writing and working about this space. So have dinner with your friends and talk about what this could look like in your life, because I think people want this human connection. And be the instigator, be the person that is willing to just start a conversation. You're not committing to anything, but start a conversation and see where it goes.
Okay, lovely. And for those that are now potentially inspired to walk through this journey, any additional recommendations or pieces of advice you can share?
I think, don't question yourself too much. Realize that you will learn by doing. And we really do try, and especially Supernuclear, we have a table of contents and you can really dive into whatever subject is of interest to you. We have a really rich archive and we try and give people the tools to make this more achievable.
Fantastic. Okay. So one tradition we're going to have on the podcast. So we're big believers in Solarpunk and a Solarpunk future. Essentially, through Solarpunk, we're aiming to create a positive and optimistic vision of the future and help manifest it into reality. So, Gillian, what would you say is your most beautiful, optimistic vision of the future?
I believe in a future where we are living in abundance, and that it is abundance that we have generated through much more efficient use of natural resources, approaching having our agriculture be regenerative, not just not just eco-friendly, but truly regenerating the earth, and living in harmony with nature. And I do believe living in these interconnected villages. And when I say village, it doesn't have to be rural. It can be a village that's vertical in an apartment building, but where people have found their own tribes, whether it's their biological family or extended or chosen family. And I believe that we can, yes, live in this world where you have found exactly the people that are going to inspire you to be your best self and give you the support you need and give you a sense of purpose and mission.
Wow.
And yeah,
Love
that's what
that.
I'd love to say.
Beautiful, beautiful. That's Solarpunk.
Yeah.
Gillian, thank you again. It's an absolute honor. You are such a powerhouse, and yeah, so grateful to have this connection with you, and really excited to see what's ahead.
It's a pleasure to speak. Thank you so much.
All
Thank you
right,
for
thank
doing
you.
what you do.
I appreciate it.
Cool.
Okay.